All right, so get ready because today we're taking a deep dive into urban water sustainability. We're going to be using this Urban Independence Handbook as our guide, and we're going to be figuring out just how you can make your city living, a little bit more eco-friendly. And hey, maybe even save some cash while we're at it.
It's amazing how this handbook really flips the script on how we think about cities. We think of them as these concrete jungles, but it really highlights how much potential there is for cities to be self-sufficient, especially when it comes to water.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a surprise, right? You think about cities, you think about buildings and concrete, not exactly like, babbling brooks and stuff. So why should city dwellers even care about water sustainability? Like, what's the big deal?
Well, I think the first thing to understand is that it's not just about the environment, right? Becoming more water wise, it really benefits you personally as well. I mean, just think about it. When we reduce our reliance on those big centralized water systems, we can really lessen the strain on freshwater sources. We can minimize all that pollution that comes from those big treatment plants. And we can even lower our carbon footprint. It's like a ripple effect.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. But the handbook, it also mentions something that's, a little bit alarming, right? Cities, they're actually pretty vulnerable when it comes to disruptions in those water systems.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that a little bit? What's going on there?
Well, just think about it for a second. You've got storms, you've got droughts, aging infrastructure. All of these things can disrupt the water supply that honestly we just take for granted. Imagine, right? You turn on your tap and nothing comes out. That's a scary thought. And this handbook, it really emphasizes that we need to start building more resilience, but not just on a city level, right? At the individual level. And that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, all right, you got me intrigued now. So let's talk about some solutions. Chapter 4 jumps right into rainwater harvesting, which is one of those things that's always kind of sounded cool to me, but I've never really wrapped my head around it. So can you break it down for us? What is rainwater harvesting all about?
Absolutely. Rainwater harvesting, it's really as simple as it sounds. It's just collecting and storing rainwater that you can then use for all sorts of things. I know it sounds like something you'd see in a survivalist manual, but it's actually super practical, even in cities.
So are we talking about like setting up giant barrels under every downspout? Like what can you actually do with all that rainwater that you collect?
Well, the handbook, it highlights a ton of possibilities. You can water your garden, you can wash your car, you can even flush your toilets with it. And get this, you could potentially save a ton of money on your water bill.
Wait, seriously? So catching rainwater, that could actually save me money. Okay, now I'm really listening. But before I start picturing myself as like a modern day rain catcher, what does it actually take to set one of these systems up?
Well, the good news is the handbook, it walks us through the whole design and installation process, step by step. And honestly, it's not as complicated as you might think. So you've got your gutters, right? They're collecting the rainwater. You've got your downspouts, they're directing it. And then you have a storage tank. And that could be anything from a simple rain barrel all the way up to a larger underground cistern.
A cistern.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds fancy. What exactly is a cistern?
Yeah, so basically it's just an underground tank.
Yeah.
But it's specifically designed to hold a lot of water. Think of it like a giant underground reservoir for your rainwater.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. But I'm guessing it's a little more complicated than just sticking a tank underground. What about filtering all that rainwater?
Oh, you're absolutely right. Filtration, it's super important, especially if you're planning on using the water for anything more than watering your plants. The handbook, it goes into a bunch of different filtration methods. You've got simple screens that'll remove leaves and debris. And then you've got more complex systems that use UV light or chlorination to actually kill bacteria.
Okay, so there are options, right?
Yeah.
Depending on how you want to use the water. That makes sense. But before I run off and start, designing my rainwater empire,
Yeah.
I got to ask, are there regulations around this sort of thing?
It's a great question. And honestly, the answer depends a lot on where you live. Regulations, they can vary wildly from place to place. So it's super important to check with your local authorities before you build anything. Some areas, they might require permits, or they might have restrictions on how you can actually use the water.
Okay, no rogue rainwater harvesting operations. Duly noted. But let's say I've done my research right. I've checked all the regulations, and I'm ready to go all in on rainwater harvesting. Are there any downsides or any challenges that I should be aware of?
Well, one thing to keep in mind is maintenance. Like any system, it needs a little TLC every now and then. You've got to regularly clean your gutters and downspouts. You've got to inspect your storage tank to make sure there are no leaks. And you're going to need to replace the filters every once in a while just to keep everything running smoothly.
Okay, so even a rainwater harvesting system needs a little bit of love every now and then. I
Oh.
got it. But overall, it sounds like an awesome way to become more water-wise. And like we said, maybe even save some money in the process.
Yeah.
So what else does the handbook recommend?
Well, Chapter 4 also goes into gray water systems and reuse, which is another super interesting way to cut back on our reliance on fresh water.
Okay, gray water. I'm not going to lie, the term itself makes me a little squeamish.
Hmm.
We're talking about reusing water from, well,
Let me stop you right there. Let's just clear up any misconceptions about gray water right away. We are not talking about toilet water. Gray water, it refers specifically to the wastewater that comes from your sinks, showers, and laundry. And honestly, it's totally safe to reuse, especially for things like watering your garden.
okay, so I'm not showering in recycled toilet water. Got it.
Yeah.
But what about all the soap and stuff in gray water? Is it really okay to use that on plants?
Yeah, that's where the systems part comes in. The handbook, it walks us through how to set up a gray water system. And basically what it does is it diverts the wastewater from those specific sources and then filters out any solids or contaminants.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this works. It's like giving that water a second life instead of just sending it straight down the drain.
Exactly. And think about the environmental impact, right? I mean, we could be conserving a ton of fresh water if everyone started reusing their gray water. Plus, your plants will thank you for it.
All right, you've officially got me intrigued by this whole gray water system thing. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of how to actually set one up, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back to explore the world of gray water reuse and all of its eco-friendly glory.
Welcome back. We were just starting to dive into this really interesting world of gray water systems.
Yeah, so let's say, I'm ready to roll up my sleeves, get my hands dirty, figuratively speaking, of course. How do I actually go about setting up one of these gray water systems in my little urban dwelling?
Well, the good news is the handbook in section 4.3.1, it lays out the whole process really clearly. And the first step is, pretty simple. You just got to identify where your gray water is coming from. Your shower, bathroom sinks, and laundry are going to be your main sources.
Okay, so no kitchen sink. I'm guessing that's because of all the food particles and grease.
Okay. Kitchen sink wastewater, that's usually considered black water, and that requires a whole different level of treatment, more complex. So for now, we're going to stick with those simpler, safer gray water sources.
Right, makes sense. Stick with the easy stuff. So once I've figured out where my gray water is coming from, what's next?
All right, so then you got to choose the right system for your needs. And, for your home's layout, that's important. The handbook explains that there are two main types of gray water systems. You've got gravity-fed and pumped systems.
Okay, so gravity-fed, that sounds pretty self-explanatory. But what about pumped systems? When would you need one of those?
Yeah, so gravity-fed systems, they just rely on, well, gravity to move the water, right? But with pumped systems, you're using a pump to get that water where it needs to go, especially if you need to send it uphill or over a longer distance.
Okay, starting to get the picture here. But what about filtering the gray water? Do I need to invest in some crazy expensive filtration system?
Well, it really depends on what you're planning on using the water for. If you're just using it for basic irrigation, watering your plants, a simple filter that'll remove hair, lint, and bigger debris might be all you need. The handbook even suggests using a mesh screen or gravel-filled trench. You can even DIY it.
Ooh, I love a good DIY project. But what if I wanted to use the gray water for something more than just watering my plants? Like, what if I wanted to use it to flush my toilet?
Yeah. For indoor use, you're definitely going to need a more advanced filtration system, something a little more heavy duty. The handbook, it goes into a bunch of different options for that. You've got sand filters, activated carbon filters, and even these biological filters that use bacteria, good bacteria, to break down the organic matter.
Wow, so we're talking like a mini water treatment plant right in your home. But I'm guessing with more complexity comes more maintenance, right?
Yeah, that's true. You're going to need to check and clean those filters regularly to keep everything running smoothly. But honestly, a little maintenance is a small price to pay, especially when you think about all the environmental benefits. And, let's not forget about the money you'll save by reusing your gray water.
Right, makes sense. All right, so I'm sold on the concept. But before I go tearing apart my plumbing, what about safety and regulations? I'm sure there are rules around this sort of thing, right?
Oh, absolutely. Safety and regulations are super important, and the handbook actually dedicates a whole section to it, section 4.3.2. First and foremost, you always want to check with your local authorities. Make sure you're following all the specific regulations and permit requirements for gray water systems in your area.
Okay, no rogue gray water operations. Got it. What about the safety side of things? Anything else I need to be careful about?
Yeah, so the handbook really stresses the importance of good design and proper installation. You want to prevent any backflow or contamination of your fresh water sources. They often recommend using a surge tank or a diverter valve. That way you can make sure that the gray water is flowing in the right direction and that it's not mixing with your drinking water supply.
Right, safety first, for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming using gray water for anything other than irrigation, like inside the house, that's going to require some extra precautions.
Exactly. The handbook's very clear about that. If you're going to use gray water for flushing toilets or anything else indoors, it needs to go through more serious filtration and probably disinfection too, just to make sure it's safe.
Right. Got it. So it's all about choosing the right system, following the safety guidelines, and being really mindful of how you're planning to use the water. It sounds like with a little planning and know-how, gray water reuse can be a safe and effective way to conserve water and, do our part for the environment.
Exactly. It's a simple shift in how we think about water, but it can make a big difference. And it really aligns with those principles of urban sustainability that Chapter 4 talks about.
We've covered rainwater harvesting. We've explored the ins and outs of gray water systems. What other water-saving gems does this Urban Independence Handbook have in store for us?
Well, that brings us to section 4.4, water saving technologies. Get ready to geek out a little bit because we're about to dive into some really cool gadgets and innovations, things that'll make conserving water in the city a breeze and maybe even a little bit fun.
Okay, you've got my attention. Let's talk water-saving tech. Okay, so water-saving tech, let's do it. I'm ready to hear about all these gadgets, the ones that can make my city living, more sustainable, and hey, maybe save me a few bucks while we're at it.
All right, well, section 4.4, it starts off with something you've probably heard of before, low flow fixtures. These are the things that reduce your water usage without making you sacrifice performance.
Okay, low flow, yeah. I gotta be honest with you, I've always been a little bit skeptical about those low flow shower heads. Can they really give you a good shower experience without it feeling like, a trickle?
Yeah, well, technology, it's come a long way. Like the low flow fixtures we have nowadays, they use these really cool designs, like aerators, for example. They mix air into the water stream, so you feel like you're getting more pressure, but you're actually using less water.
So I can still have my nice, powerful shower in the morning, but I can also feel good about saving water.
Mm.
That's awesome. But it's not just about showers, right?
No, absolutely not. Low flow faucets in your kitchen and bathroom, those can make a huge difference too. And don't forget about appliances like your washing machine and dishwasher. You want to look for those high water efficiency readings. Those little labels can save you a ton of water in the long run.
Okay, mental note, got to check those ratings next time I'm buying appliances. But what about, the water we use outside? Like, that's where things get tricky, especially in a city.
Yeah, that's a good point. But that's where these smart irrigation systems come in. Imagine a system that basically acts like a weatherman for your plants. It adjusts your watering schedule based on the actual conditions outside.
Wait, hold on. Are we talking about sprinklers that know when it's going to rain? That sounds like something straight out of the future.
It's actually more common than you think. These systems, they use sensors to track all sorts of things: soil, moisture, temperature, even the local weather forecast. You don't have to guess anymore. They make sure your plants are getting exactly what they need without wasting a single drop.
Wow. So it's like having a little robot gardener taking care of all my plants. That's amazing. What other cool tech does the handbook mention?
Well, how about leak detectors? These are super handy. They can monitor your plumbing and alert you if there's even a tiny leak. That way, you can catch it before it becomes a big problem.
So no more surprise floods in the basement or, those crazy high water bills from a leak you didn't even know you had.
Exactly. Leak detectors, they can save you a ton of money and hassle and prevent water damage. Plus, they help conserve water, so it's a win all around.
Okay, I'm adding leak detectors to my wish list right now. It's really amazing how technology can make saving water so easy and even preventative. But in all this high-tech talk, let's not forget about the simple stuff, right?
Absolutely. The handbook, it reminds us that even small changes in our habits can make a big difference, like taking shorter showers, fixing leaky faucets right away, and only running your dishwasher or washing machine when they're full. Simple stuff, but it really adds up.
It's all about being more aware of our water use
Right.
and making conscious choices. whether we're using fancy gadgets or just changing our habits. Oh, you mentioned those urban water conservation techniques. Can you give us a few examples of what those look like?
Yeah, for sure. So the handbook talks about things like using mulch in your garden to keep the moisture in, choosing plants that don't need a lot of water, those drought-tolerant ones, and even something as simple as setting up a rain barrel to water your plants.
It all comes back to understanding these water sustainability principles and figuring out how to actually apply them in our lives. It's really inspiring to see how much we can do, even in a city.
Yeah, it's really a team effort, right? Every little bit counts, whether you're installing a low-flow shower head or just turning off the tap while you brush your teeth. We're all working towards a more sustainable future for our cities and the planet.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into urban water sustainability. I hope you learned some new things today
Yeah.
and that you feel inspired to make a difference in your own little corner of the world. Until next time, stay curious and keep on learning.